Hello everyone, my name is Halvey. In this video, we will be seeing if it is possible to beat Fire Emblem The Binding Blade with just Roy and Lilina. So this will be a hard mode playthrough to get the most challenge. This will work in the same way that my Erica and Ephraim solo did, meaning that Roy and Lilina will be the only ones to damage and defeat enemies in order for me to beat each map. And I should clarify that that only includes player units. Green units will still attack enemies. There is nothing I can do about that. I am also going to try my hardest to get all of the legendary weapons and defeat Idunn. I don't have to use any extra units to do that. I just need some to be recruited and alive. So Roy is widely considered one of, if not the worst lord in the series, gameplay wise. His base stats are nothing special, and his growths aren't doing him any favors either. His strength is my biggest concern. He needs to have good strength if this is going to work. First off, I rescue and move everyone else out of the way. This is easy to do since I can set them up in such a way that Roy is open to attacks on 3 sides and enemies will almost always go after Roy over anyone else. I allowed myself to use Roy to trade for some extra swords and vulneraries. This is because it would be impossible for Roy to beat the map with only his rapier and single vulnerary. The first wave of enemies is mostly RNG dependent. I had so many failed attempts at the beginning here. Roy faces roughly 20% chance hits from all the axe fighters if he's in a forest. I do miss out on the money in the village, which sucks. I work up the map and keep Roy in forest and mountains so he evades most attacks and I can take out the rest of the enemies. I'm going to make use of the boss to sacrifice the others to the gods and hope they bless Roy's level ups. The boss was the second biggest challenge as there is no defensive terrain around him. The boss's axe is still very inaccurate, but it's going to take a lot of hits from Roy to defeat him. I attack him pretty aggressively because I don't want him to heal too often and I want to kill him as fast as possible so I can conserve my swords and vulneraries. Roy ends up at level 7 and he got amazing level ups. I really cannot complain, so we'll continue as he is. So in chapter 2, I just send Roy forward. I want to try to move Deke's group out of the way as soon as possible, but just in case I can't, I toss a lot and Ward's weapons. Then I try to use Shanna to rescue them away. Roy is getting pretty strong at this point, so I don't have to be too concerned with how I move him around. I can just be aggressive and attack, but this is where we start to see Roy's biggest weakness, which is his lack of 1 to 2 range options, especially in the early game here. I'm still going to kill the other units off on the boss, and while I do that, I get the armor slayer from the village and do some shopping. I do use Merlinus a bit here as I don't have access to battle preps yet, and I want Roy to be set up for the next chapter, and I also want to hold on to the other characters' swords and vulneraries. Another thing is that I tried to kill Shanna, but she kept dodging, and I did not want her to keep getting experience, so I kept her alive as I am going Zakea route, so I'll have to give Shin probably at least 9 experience later, and I'll explain more about why I'm going Zakea route later. The boss could have given me a hard time as Roy dealt decent damage to him with the armor slayer, but had a shaky hit rate. I got lucky and hit 3 attacks in a row. I really want to conserve the armor slayer as much as possible. It is really good in Binding Blade. Roy's level ups were kinda bad this chapter, but we'll see how this turns out. For chapter 3, I start by putting Chad's items in storage and move Merlinus, Chad, and Shanna away. They get killed anyway though, and Shanna gets more XP, so later I will need to remember to give Shin at least 11 XP. Roy will have limited access to weapons and healing in this chapter. There are no forts, so vulneraries are my only healing. I move Roy into the forest up against the wall there. Like in the last chapter, Roy will have a hard time against the ranged units. I wait out the reinforcements, and then once there are only ranged attackers left, I can safely take them out one by one. I get the mend from the village. Next chapter I'll just put it in storage. Then I can make my way towards the boss. I will leave the other enemies that don't move alone, and I have no way of getting the treasure. The boss is easy. 2 hits from the armor slayer can take him out. Roy's level ups are getting progressively worse, but he's still solid thanks to his amazing ones earlier. So chapter 4, I first thought that this chapter would be difficult because I thought that I would have to rush to the village to make sure I get the angelic robe. Then I realized that I could just leave Roy in the forest by the shore, and the pirates will always prefer to attack Roy rather than go straight for the villages. So as long as I kept Roy in their attack range, I could distract them and save all the villages. The angelic robe I want to use, and the other 2 have a door key and a steel blade, which I will hold on to for now. I do use Merlinus in the beginning, but I think of it more like battle preps, but on the first turn. Roy does fairly well against the cavaliers and nomads, except that I have to go out of my way and into one range to fight the nomads, but I can usually keep Roy in the forest and heal as needed. Clarine recruits herself, and then I just leave her alone and she eventually gets killed. Rutger is scary because he has like a 19% crit chance against me, but only like a 43% hit if I'm in a forest, and only 5 damage, and I actually do take a crit. Luckily I had myself healed up. After Rutger and the other aggressive enemies are dealt with, I can run around to the villages and take out the remaining enemies for experience, and I also buy a sword so I don't waste the rapier on the remaining enemies. Eric is pretty bad, 3 hits from the rapier can take him out, but I crit anyway and kill him in one shot. Roy hit level 20 and these are his stats. I can't complain, I'm grateful for his defense. His HP would be 1 above average, taking away the angelic robe. About average strength, the only thing I don't like. Average skill, speed is about 2 above average, +1 luck, +4 defense, and average resistance, so slightly above average overall. In chapter 5, I use Merlinus as a first turn battle preps again. This was an easy chapter as the majority of enemies are axe users and they have really no chance of hitting Roy, even if he's in a plain tile. It was more annoying than anything with all of the nomads and hand axes. I go ahead and move Roy in front of the door, which opens it automatically, but it does spawn reinforcements. I get stuck in the pass between the mountains where the door was, but I'm fine as long as I keep myself healed. After I take out a lot of enemies, I can push my way forward towards the boss. The boss has a killer axe dealing 15 damage with roughly a 15% crit and 22% hit against Roy. Scary, but I'm confident nothing bad will happen. It takes a while, but Roy is able to take out the boss, and luckily Roy is blocking the gate so that no more enemies can get on it and Roy can seize. In chapter 6, I finally have access to battle preps. This chapter was the hardest so far, so I decided on going the Sakai route, and that means if I want to get 20x, I need to recruit and keep alive Sue, Shin, and Dayan. Sue is recruited in this chapter. The problem is that she is locked in a room, and Kath will not open her door as she goes up the right side and then flees, so I need to carry that door key that I got back in chapter 4, which leads to the next problem of only having 5 inventory slots. I'm not going to use Merlinus anymore except for one more time in chapter 8, and you'll see later that he wouldn't have been much help anyway here, as he likely would have died. So I settled on taking the door key, a vulnerary, the armor slayer, the iron blade, and an iron sword. The armor slayer is required to kill the knights at the start, and then the iron blade is required to kill the soldiers in one round. I can't say Roy is strength screwed, but he didn't get as much as I would have liked, so he can't one round soldiers with just an iron sword. I also still wanted an iron sword though, as it can one round the mages, and it doesn't slow Roy down when equipped, so later when I get surrounded by javelin soldiers, I can have the iron sword equipped so Roy has the best avoid. The iron sword also turned out to be the best option to kill the boss, which was the main target of this chapter. The throne is the only reachable defensive terrain tile in this map. There are tons of initial enemies and reinforcements. Roy faced low 30s hit chances against the knights and soldiers, and low 40s or 50s against the mages, depending if they had a fire or thunder tome. So the outcome of this map was highly dependent on RNG, but my plan was to kill the boss as soon as possible and then sit on the throne to deal with the rest of the enemies, and it came very close, but I did make it work in the end. Also, killing the boss stops all reinforcements except for the ones that appear after all members of your party cross a line that is slightly lower than the midpoint, and said reinforcements appear just after Dorothy and Saul are killed. After the boss was killed, I could just sit on the throne and heal up and take out the remaining enemies before finally opening up Sue's room and talking to her. Then I can seize. Also, while on the throne, I had to be very careful not to misclick, as the seize command is at the top of the list. So chapter 7, if I were to go Ilya route, I would need to recruit and keep Zealot alive to get 20x in that route. That is very unlikely to happen though. Even if Roy had capped stats, I still don't think it would be possible. There are just too many enemies here. My first attempt for this entire run ended in this chapter, as I first thought Ilya route would be easier, but once I got to this chapter, after many failed attempts, I realized I would just have to reset the run and try for Sakai route instead. As you can see, Zealot, Trek, and Noah just get surrounded by enemies, and most of them have ranged weapons, making it so that Roy can't kill them on enemy phase, and it's just a nightmare to try and save Zealot. I run and get the killing edge and have a rapier on Roy, as well as 2 iron swords. The killing edge and rapier will help one round a lot of enemies, and then I place Roy in the forest at the start of the map, and the enemies will have barely any hit on him. The 2 priests with the physics staves are very annoying, as they will try to keep their distance from me, and it will never be safe for me to attack them unless I can do so from a forest tile. I get lucky and actually get an opening to kill one of them early on. Then for the second one, I just tried to get as far left in the map as I could, and then it seemed that by being that far away from the priest, the enemies didn't have their healing AI activated, and they just continued to attack me rather than retreat for healing. The enemies, especially the wyverns, are impossible to kill as long as they have healing, as they will always run away at low health. This was going to make me run out of weapons fast, so luckily, since the priest and the enemies didn't want to heal each other, I was able to kill the majority of enemies with with just a few uses of an iron sword remaining, though there was one point I had to get a longbow from the village and sell it to buy vulneraries to keep my health okay. Then I could finish off the rest of the enemies and go around to the villages, get some good items, sell the things I don't need, and refresh my supply of weapons. With all that done, it was just the boss and his reinforcements left. I do some more shopping and prepare myself for that. I buy door keys for if I ever need them, as well as a chest key to get the items in the chest in this map and some in the next possibly. I also buy fire and thunder tones for when I get Lilina. I just try to guess what all I'll need and use up all my money. The reinforcements aren't bad as I can fight them from forest tiles, and then I get the rapier from the chest to easily kill the boss. In Chapter 8, this is where Lilina joins, though she will be locked in a room for most of the map. I absolutely need to get the guiding ring from one of the chests. Lilina will likely hit level 20 pretty quick, just like Roy, so I want to be able to promote her as soon as possible. The next one won't be until the one that Sophia gets in Chapter 14. There is also a light brand, which is the only one in the game until an armory in Chapter 23 that sells them. I won't get this though, as it really won't be useful and it would break pretty quick. I would also say that it is impossible for me to get because Kath and the other thief in this map will get their way before I do. I'm more interested in trying to get the secret book and the Elysian whip that are in the same treasure room as the guiding ring. I only have 3 uses on my chest key, so I can only get 3 things. This was the most difficult and RNG dependent map by far in the entire game. Bringing Merlinus was necessary because I needed to restock my weapons and get out some vulneraries for healing towards the end of the map. There are a lot of enemies in this map, both starting out and reinforcements. I also make some use out of Astolfo. I put his items in the convoy and then I use him to distract one soldier because there is something about this soldier. He will just attack Astolfo until he kills him, then it's like his aggressive AI is turned off. He's the only one that I noticed was like that. So after he kills Astolfo, he will just stand still, which is really helpful. But the strategy for this map is to have Roy rush through the map and be Lilina's Superman and save her in her time of distress. I need to move myself carefully and make sure that I'm taking out enemies every turn while still making as much progress to Lilina. Luckily, I can one round all of the archers and soldiers with either a steel sword or iron blade. The mercenaries and knights though take multiple rounds. There is also one knight early on that I have to make sure I kill, otherwise he runs away and heals. Basically, I have to reach the first chest room by turn 14 or 15 at the latest with no enemies left behind other than that soldier that just stands around. The next challenge is dealing with the enemies outside the chest room and making sure that generic thief doesn't get away before I can kill him, otherwise he will run and steal the guiding ring from me. I use Lilina to block the one exit from the room to force the thief to run in Roy's direction. Then I prayed for a lucky crit and got it. If I didn't crit him him, he would have gotten away. After that, I can finish off the nearby enemies and sneak Lilina behind Roy and get her out of harm's way. I try and kill some archers then before I heal and retreat closer to the pillar in case I would need it. Luckily, I have plenty of healing left, so it's just a matter of dealing with these last aggressive enemies in the most efficient way I could think of. Also, for Barth's group, I just tossed their weapons and let them die. Also, I was so relieved to see that those reinforcements that appear in the top left corner don't break down that wall, so they'll just be stuck in there. If I would have had to deal with them as well, this map would have been impossible for me. I can finally make it back to Merlinus to prepare myself for the rest of the enemies and the boss. Also, Roy and Lilina have a really fast support, and I can get it up to B rank already in this map. I get the treasures I wanted, the Elysian Whip is cash, and the secret book is either cash or I could use it, I don't know yet. This is a really tough boss, but only because I have only 3 uses on my rapier left. I was hoping for a crit but didn't get it, but I at least hit all 3 attacks to leave him pretty low. Then my only option left is a steel blade, and I just had my fingers crossed that I would hit him with it enough to slowly chip him down. I finally get him down to 1 HP and I let Lilina finish the job. I'm glad that's over. The run should get significantly easier from now on. So now chapter 8X, like most of these chapters, right away there will be a wave of enemies that rush towards me. Roy is fine and can handle his own. Lilina will get killed in one round by most of these guys. So the first part of this map is kind of like a puzzle where I need to let them aggro towards Roy and keep Lilina out of their range until Roy has taken out the majority of them. This took a couple tries to get it right, but then after that the rest of the map is a lot less scary until we get to the boss. So I wait until all the aggressive enemies have been dealt with. By the way, I like to categorize enemies by their AI tendencies. I split them between what I like to call passive, passive-aggressive, and aggressive. Passive meaning that they stand still and will only attack if a unit is in their stationary attack range. Then there's passive-aggressive meaning that enemies will stand still until you enter their full movement and attack range or anywhere close, in which case they will move to attack you. Finally, we have aggressive, which is when enemies just immediately charge at you no matter where you are, like the ones in the beginning of this map and many prior ones. So for the rest of the enemies in this map, I can bait them out one by one and try to get Lilina as many kills as possible. Lilina will get some decent level ups in this chapter. I would have liked more speed, which is where Lilina could have some problems. I also get Roy and Lilina at A rank support. From this they get +3 attack, +1 defense, +7 avoid, +15 hit, and +15 crit. So not bad, very attack focused, and actually, as we'll see later, the hit and crit it gives is great for taking out bosses. So as I make my way towards the boss, some enemies do not move because they are surrounded by fire tiles to trick you into stepping on them. There is one group of enemies that is really set up in this way, but I just try to be as careful as possible. Then the boss is the toughest one so far. Even casually, this guy is really hard to kill. My best bet is to use a steel sword and I can slowly chip him down while also praying for a crit. I can manipulate him into equipping his hand axe for every other round of combat. He heals 3 HP every turn, which is why I want the steel sword as it gives me the best ratio for hit versus damage. Lilina is useless except for her support bonuses. I'm just hoping I hit him and eventually I do get the crit to kill him, and then I can end the map and we get the Randall, which Roy can't even use until after he promotes right before chapter 22. So chapter 9 is this fog of war map, making it very annoying since throughout the entire map I have limited sight and can barely see the enemies that are coming my way. So I kind of messed around and played the first few turns a few times to see what is coming my way. There aren't too many enemies that rush towards me right away, but 2 notable ones are Fur and Shin. So Fur doesn't really matter. I'm not recruiting her, I'll just feed her to Lilina. Shin, however, I need to be careful and not place Lilina or Sue in his range or he'll kill them. I brought Sue since she recruits Shin and I need Shin recruited and alive for 20x. I also remember to give Shin plenty of experience so that I can get the Sakai route. I make use of the waves upon waves of reinforcements that are in this map. I would have liked to give all of the experience from the reinforcements to Lilina, but I wasn't able to set myself up properly. While this was going on, I realized I probably could have set up Roy and Lilina together in the mountains at the bottom of the map, and down there the pirates would have close to 0% chances of hitting her. Roy faces close to 0 chance hits from them in a plain tile. So what ended up happening is that I had Shin in a forest with no weapons or items, and he will get experience as the pirates attack him, which happens a lot. They had like 10% chances to hit him, and I trusted that they would never hit him, which they don't. Then I have Roy kill them as efficiently as possible. Then when there are only a few left, I try to bring Lilina up to get at least some kills. Now all is left is the boss and remaining enemies. Another thing is that I won't make it to the villages at all in time, which is fine because the loot isn't anything important except a silver sword that would have been nice. Also, it will default to the A route for the next 2 chapters, which is what I wanted anyway. So I make my way to the shops to do some shopping. I contemplated on selling the secret book, but then I decided to use it on Lilina. I don't know why, but I was thinking it would give +4 skill. Then I saw it only gave 2 and I instantly regretted it. Oh well. Some of the remaining enemies are passive aggressive but in groups, which makes feeding them to Lilina a little more difficult. Eventually though, I make it to the boss. This guy is scary but also not scary at the same time. Roy does fine against him except for the chance that Roy will get crit from the boss's killer axe. Roy can take a crit if he's close to full HP, but I don't want to see it happen. So much like the last boss, I manipulate this guy into equipping his hand axe every other turn or so. That way I face the killer axe as little as possible. Roy also gets a crit, which helps a lot, and then I can safely give Lilina the kill. Then I use the gate to heal up and finish the remaining enemies to try and give Lilina more experience. Her level ups have been pretty bad, but she could still turn out okay. Now in chapter 10, so I find A route to be much easier because this map has lots of axe users and there is no incentive for me to have to rush through the map or anything. The village has a sword reaver which is useless, except that I could sell it, but still not worth the effort. There is also Geese who will show up later in the map and I just let him run around to get killed. He does kill a shaman before he dies though. Gonzalez also shows up later as an enemy and he ends up getting injured and then he retreats for healing, and this happens twice. The first time he uses his vulnerary to heal and attack me again, then I don't finish him off again and he runs all the way down to the forts at the bottom of the map to heal before coming back for the final time where I have Roy crit and kill him. So I just sit Roy and Lilina in the mountains at the top of the map first with Lilina in the back so she doesn't face the mercenaries at one range because they would have had like a 50% chance to hit her almost and probably would have killed her. But once they are killed, I switch and put Lilina out front as there are only axe users left who have close to 0% chance to hit her. So this chapter was Lilina's best training chapter. I get her to level 20 and promote her. So she ended up with about average HP, average magic, -2 skill, but the secret book pushed her up to average, average speed, average luck, -1 defense, and average resistance. So overall this is an average level 20 Lilina. Promoting her to Sage does give her good bonuses to all the areas she needs, except for defense. She is a glass cannon, and as long as she can stay in defensive terrain and stay close to Roy, she should be able to dodge tank decent enough, but at least now I have a healer and someone else to help kill the bosses. She also automatically got S rank in tomes. After the reinforcements are dealt with, I can make my way to the boss. Roy still has to draw the enemies in and protect Lilina. Then once it's just the boss left, I use the fort to heal up and the boss is not a problem at all. He does have a Nosferatu, but if I let him attack me first, it doesn't really do much for him. Roy gets a crit and then I can give Lilina the kill for the experience. In chapter 11, there are a lot of good items from the villages, and getting those items is going to be tough. Another reason why A route is better is because in B route, to get 12x, Elfin needs to stay alive, which would be a challenge, but luckily in A route you get Larum instead, and it doesn't matter if she dies. So I figured that going up the northern part of this map and entering in from that breakable wall up there would be my best chance to save as many villages as I can. It does get clogged up with a lot of enemies. Lilina can take out a lot of them though. The brigands that will destroy the villages come from the caves in the peaks. If you remember back to chapter 4, the key to saving the villages was to have Roy in their attack range and distract them. The same thing goes here, this time using Lilina to try and distract them. The one closer to the bottom of the map though is a lost cause. He will go and destroy 4 of the villages before I can kill him. As for the ones up top, luckily I can get there in time to distract them before they get to the one with the speed wings. They do get the one with the angelic robe though, which sucks, and I missed out on a dragon shield in another one. But the fact that I saved the Speedwings village means that all of the other brigand reinforcements are attracted to it, and then they come within range of Lilina and attack her rather than destroy the village. Also, a fighter got injured and retreated to one of the caves, and I think he ended up blocking some reinforcements, but I'm not sure as I wasn't paying close attention to that or the turns. Klein could have given me some trouble, but Lilina two-shot him and dodged his attacks. That would have killed her or brought her down to barely any HP. Thea is pretty weak and wasn't a problem. Echidna shows up and kills maybe one enemy before dying herself. There is also a mid-boss that shows up and was the same as Klein. Luckily, Lilina dodged his attack and then two-shot him. So after all the chaos is contained, I just got the items that I could get from the villages. I gave the speed wings to Lilina as she would make the most use out of it. Her magic is off the charts, so any extra speed she can get is nice. I sell the other 2 items and stock up on fire tomes for now. I really wanted to get money from the arena because I am really poor right now, but it scares me too much and I don't want to do this map over again. Then I clean up the remaining enemies and Lilina absolutely destroys the boss. In just like 2 chapters, Lilina went from 0 to 100, and I also want to say that Lilina is like the opposite of Roy in that she has so much magic and attack power compared to him, but Roy definitely has the better speed and defense potential. Lilina is at least getting HP, but she is still so frail. Chapter 12 is a pretty straightforward chapter. I just have to get to the throne and seize by turn 20 at the latest. There are 2 priests with sleep staves that will try to make it difficult for me. Lilina will do all of the killing in this chapter, even the boss she tears apart. With Roy in her support range, Lilina doesn't have much to worry about. Only the archers with steel bows that have roughly 30% chances to hit her. I am able to completely ignore the sniper. Only the first sleep staff gives me trouble. Roy dodges the first use, which was necessary. Unfortunately, he does get hit by the second and third uses, but as long as he dodges 1 use, everything is okay. While Roy is asleep, I have Lilina make her way to the boss, and I had a door key so she could open the door without wasting turns breaking down the wall to get into the boss room. I use her to kill the other priest with a sleep staff so it doesn't bother Roy later. Lilina can kill the boss in 3 hits, and luckily his firestone is only 1 range, otherwise she would have gotten 1 shot. Then I just have to wait for Roy, and I was getting kind of worried he wouldn't make it in time. But Lilina gives him a little encouragement, and he makes it on turn 20, the absolute latest turn, to get 12x. Also, I forgot to get a chest key last chapter. I maybe could have gotten some treasure in this map. 12x is another straightforward map. Again, I can't get any treasure since I forgot to buy a chest key, but as for the map itself, I just run straight for the throne and have mostly Lilina kill all in my way. It's not really that hard. The fog of war doesn't make much of a difference. Lilina will cap her magic at 30 in this chapter. The numbers are in my favor against the boss. He does get lucky and dodges 2 of Lilina's attacks though. After we beat this one, we get Armads, which can't be used by Roy or Lilina. Chapter 13 is another one of those maps where it is best for me to camp out in the nearby forest where we start from and just wait out all of the aggressive enemies and reinforcements. Melody is also automatically recruited in this map, and I'm so glad that she is a flyer and can just stay over the water and out of harm's way for the entire map. There are some enemy wyverns that could have given her trouble, but luckily they just made a straight line towards Roy and Lilina and then just aggroed onto them until I could kill them with Lilina. Melody is required to recruit Zeiss, and both of them need to be recruited and alive to get 21x. Another thing is that Roy has been spending too much time with Merlinus in between chapters and started to see Merlinus as a role model, and he wants to follow in his footsteps. So he put his sword away for now and instead decided that he will just carry all of Lilina's things and she can come talk to him if she needs anything. Lilina is fine with it because she really likes Roy, but in all seriousness, Roy is almost useless for combat now. Pretty soon he'll just be poking enemies with his sword. They probably wouldn't even notice him. Meanwhile, Lilina is just incinerating them, leaving no traces that they ever existed. So I actually just had the idea to have no swords on him and just use him as a convoy for Lilina. I gave Lilina 4 fire tomes and 1 thunder, and then 1 heal and 4 vulneraries on Roy, in the case that Lilina would need any healing, and if Roy would ever need a lot of healing, I could just trade the heal staff over to Lilina and use it to heal Roy. Same thing with the vulneraries. If Lilina ever got hit and would need to heal, I could just trade it one over. I wanted Lilina to have a full inventory of tomes because I knew I would need her to kill almost every enemy on this map. Also, there are no bandits or anything that would threaten the villages, so I don't have to worry about that. Percival also leaves after some time. He comes back in chapter 15, so I'll just have to deal with him then. Once all of the reinforcements are taken care of, I can take the north bridge over to the other side. I don't really feel like bothering with the ballista on the south bridge. I have to pull the enemies towards me and then take them out from my forest, but it's really not so bad. I still want to get the village, and one, I got a body ring. I thought long and hard about what I wanted to do with it. I could sell it, but it could also be good on Roy. Tomes are really light except for 4-blaze, so it wouldn't help Lilina much, so I ended up giving it to Roy. I also just used Melody and sell her lands. Then I kill the boss with Lilina, which is barely any effort for her. Also, while I was doing this map, I thought long and hard again about using the arena to get some cash. I ultimately decided to go for it, and it wasn't scary as I thought it would be, because you do get support bonuses even in the arena. I go for wagers that are about 750 or less, and I got pretty decent luck with the enemies. There was one shaman that would 2-shot Roy, so I immediately pressed B, but it would have been a guaranteed victory for Roy, as right after I pressed B, the shaman missed, and then Roy would have doubled and killed it, but I thought it better to be safe than sorry. I go until I hit 10,000 gold, which isn't really that much, but I didn't want to stay here for too long. I used the money on mostly Elfire tomes since they hit pretty hard and don't weigh Lilina down. Their hit isn't great, but with support bonuses, it should be fine, and I figure that with Elfire, Lilina should be able to just one-shot most unpromoted enemies now, and the turnaround for Lilina is just outstanding. She went from the one being carried to the carrier in this run. Well, I guess it was only like 2.5 chapters where it was hard just trying to train her, but still. Chapter 14 is another Fog of War map, so that means it's hard for me to see what's out in front or what enemies are coming my way. There aren't too many aggressive enemies in this map, only a few mages at the start. There is also a priest with a sleep staff that can be annoying. He goes after Cecilia first and hits her. Then he likes to go after Lilina and roughly has an 18% chance to hit her. He will use his last 2 uses on her, and it's possible that he will connect, and if it does, I have to reset and try again. I have to keep Sophia alive and beat the chapter in 25 turns or less to get 14x. Both can be a challenge, but I actually had plenty of turns to spare. Keeping Sophia alive got pretty scary towards the end though. I throw away Sophia's Flux and I trade to get Cecilia's Air Caliber. So I first go up and then to the right to get to those trees for extra avoid to fight the mercenaries and heroes. I do have to enter the range of at least one wyvern that sits in the upper left corner area of the map. There are 4 of them in total, and luckily aggroing one of them doesn't cause them all to move. Another thing in this map are the hidden treasures, which I will not be getting except for the guiding ring that Sophia gets, as I had to keep moving her with me to keep her alive. The boots were the only item that I actually had a chance to get, as I stepped in its area quite a few times, but the game wouldn't give them to me. Though in one failed attempt I actually did get them and used them on Lilina, but then she got killed by the heroes and mercenaries, so I had to reset. I also really didn't feel like constantly resetting to try and get them. I have no idea how long that could have taken. Once I get past the heroes and mercenaries, I am surprised to see some wyverns waiting for me. That is not where they start in this map, so it's weird that they moved like one time and then just waited for me. Luckily Roy survives. I had the Worm Slayer on him in preparation for this scenario though, and I was also able to keep Sophia safe. There are also Berserker and Brigand reinforcements that first kill Cecilia, and then they will catch up to me if I take too long. When I make it up to the boss, I rescue Sophia with Roy, and Lilina can 2-round the boss, and I seize as soon as possible. So 14x is a very hated map, and rightfully so. The gimmick is that a lot of these pathways, like the darker blue tiles, will disappear then reappear constantly, and I don't think it ever ends. I do believe they have a pattern. I don't think it is random. Regardless, I don't know the pattern, nor did I try to look it up. Like most maps, I just hang out at the start and wait for all the aggressive enemies. They are mostly pirates that can walk on water, so they will eventually reach me. But once they are all taken care of, I just try to make my way down the path towards the boss. I'm careful that Lilina doesn't take too much damage, since her only way of healing is a couple vulneraries. Once I make it to the bottom center platform that does not disappear, I set myself up to just get the sage and the boss to waste their bolting uses. Then it's just a matter of crossing the platform to reach the boss and take him out. He does have some decent avoid, but Lilina still has no problems. We get 4 blades from this map. I will definitely be saving it for a rainy day though, and only use it if it's necessary. Chapter 15 is pretty straightforward and easy. The challenge would have been to get the Hammer'n staff. I gave it 2 attempts to get to the village in time, but I don't think it would have been possible. There are too many enemies that rush at me and just get in the way. I can save the other village, but it just has a divine tome, which I can sell later. So as usual, I have no weapons on Roy and just bring an extra fire tome for Lilina, some vulneraries, and 2 things I want to sell. I put them in the mountains at the bottom of the map, and they shouldn't get hit by anyone. It only happens once or twice. I just throw Idunn's weapon away and leave her where she is and she gets killed. Percival is not a problem for Lilina. Then there is something strange about the enemy AI later in this chapter. It's hard to describe, but for some reason maybe Lilina on low health had something to do with it, but the enemies would stop moving and then I would have to move Roy or Lilina off the mountain and then they would start moving again. Then I move back on the mountain and enemies that could attack me would, while the other enemies would stop moving. So I just had to move on and off the mountains to get the enemies to move towards me and finish them off. Then after that, I can move around and pull the remaining enemies to me. Then I retreat to some defensive terrain to kill them. Once I make it to the shop, I sell some things and buy 2 chest keys for if I were ever to get the chance to use them. I get some vulneraries and they only had thunder tomes, so I got a lot of them. Hopefully I have enough tomes to last a couple more chapters. Then I carefully pull enemies to kill them, making my way towards the boss. This boss can be fought from a mountain tile. It's not very often in this game when you can fight a boss from good defensive terrain, and Lilina tears this guy apart. Lilina also hits level 20 at the end of this map. She ended up with her HP being 2 below average, capped magic is average, skill is average, taking away the secret book, speed is +2, taking away the speed wings, -1 luck, -2 defense, and -1 resistance. So pretty average overall, but she has been carrying the run for a while now. Chapter 16 is easy, but also very annoying. There are 2 things that I have to do in this chapter. One is that Douglas has to be alive at the end of the chapter for 16x, and the other is recruiting Zeiss and keeping him alive for 21x. Zeiss stays locked behind a breakable wall and doesn't do anything unless you enter his small attack range, so he isn't a problem except for the fact that Melody recruits him, so I need to bring her and keep her alive. This still wasn't a problem. As you'll see later, she doesn't get in the way at all and it's easy to keep her out of enemy ranges. The biggest problem in this chapter is Douglas, since for whatever reason he just charges straight for you and will attack relentlessly. So like always, I just hang out at the starting point of the map and hide in the forest to take out all of the other enemies that come straight for me. There is also a bishop with a purge tome that I can make him waste at the beginning. Then there are no problems until Douglas arrives. Thankfully, there aren't many other enemies around at this time, and I can lure Douglas over to Roy and have Roy distract Douglas while Lilina kills all of the other enemies. This takes a while since there are a lot of reinforcements. I'm so glad that there isn't a turn requirement for 16x, otherwise it would have been impossible to get. Douglas also has the problem of attacking Lilina even though she has a weapon equipped when Roy does not, and this just results in Douglas's death. Keeping Douglas away from Lilina is a must. Once the enemies are taken care of, I can bring Roy back towards Lilina and I can position them so Roy and Lilina can stay together, but Roy takes all of Douglas's attacks. I can do this to take out more of the remaining enemies. But then I get to a point where I just decide that it would be easier to just force Douglas to break his weapon, and then I won't have to worry about him anymore. So I use the entrance of one of the treasure rooms to put Roy out in front and Lilina behind him to heal him for when he gets low in HP. Roy can take 2 hits from Douglas and be left with 1 HP, and then Lilina can heal a total of 40 HP with a heal staff to bring Roy right back up to full. This takes a while since Douglas only has like a 30% chance to hit and close to 20 uses on his silver axe, but eventually it breaks and I can move on in the chapter. Lilina can one-round the dragons with an L-Fire, which is great because they one-shot her if she would have had to take a counterattack. Then I can get whatever remaining treasures that are left that are of any use for me. There's some gold, a Night Crest that I can sell, and might as well pick up the Berserk Staff, though I don't see Lilina reaching B staves, but I don't know for sure at this point. I also killed Narshin around this point, and he wasn't any trouble at all. Finally, I can recruit Zeiss and end the chapter. Hugh was also in this chapter, but I didn't have enough gold for him, and I didn't plan on recruiting him, and I have no use for the member card. Chapter 16X is another map with a gimmick, which is that there are beams of light that will randomly come down in certain lines drawn vertically on the map. I looked up where these lines are and referred to it as I played the chapter, just to make things easier on myself, because getting hit by one of those makes you lose 10 HP, which could mean life or death in this chapter. There are also tons of siege tomes, a sage with a silent staff, and the boss has a berserk staff. So first I just waited around to see what enemies will charge at me, and there are only a couple. I also threw away Douglas's weapons and moved him to a corner and out of the way. I then worked on soaking up the first bolting stage and the one with the silence, and then I worked on slowly taking out the enemies. But apparently there must be some hidden trigger, because when I got far enough into the map, all the enemies just started rushing at me, including all the remaining siege tomes. I also waited until turn 21, because then I know there will be no reinforcements, because the ones that are supposed to come spawn where those two bishops are in the top corners of the map, and if they stay there long enough they will just block the reinforcements from coming in. So while I retreat, I try to avoid the light arrow spots and kill as many enemies as I can until I reach the bottom of the stairs back to the starting point. Once I get down there, then I can soak up the siege tomes and take out the enemies as they come. Once the boss is the only one left, I can make him waste his berserk staff by trading away Lilina's weapons. She does get hit by the last use, but it doesn't matter as she just follows Roy up to the boss anyway. The boss isn't all that tough, he just has a lot of avoid, but he still goes down like all of the rest. Chapter 17 is another Fog of War chapter, but it wasn't too bad actually. I do the usual with Roy being my convoy, and then conveniently there are 2 mountains right beside the starting area, so it is easy enough to situate myself in those mountains and wait for the enemies to come to me. Lilina will kill them all and we will wait while she does that. Sometimes I had to move Lilina off the mountain to kill some enemies so they won't bother Roy too much. There are 2 paths split by the peaks. The north path has mostly mages, and the south path has nomads and cavaliers. The villages are also a lost cause, they don't have anything good anyway, and there are thieves that just run around and destroy them. There are also reinforcements that last until turn 20, so I just wait out the reinforcements before I move slowly and carefully through the north path first to find any leftover enemies. Then after the north path is all clear, I go back and down through the south path. The south path is a little more treacherous because I know that there is at least 1 nomad trooper waiting for me. While I do this, on both paths I try to stay in whatever defensive terrain I can, of course to give me the best chances of survival. Then it's not too long until I clear the south path as well, and I make my way towards the boss. The boss is not scary at all. He does get that extra avoid from the gate and he actually dodges Lilina's first 2 attacks. Then he attacks her on enemy phase and it doesn't work out for him. Then comes the trip back to the arena. This is the last arena in the game for me, so I have to make it count. I really don't want to get farther into the run only for it to end because I run out of money and weapons. So I decided that it would be best to grind for some money. I grinded from 6,900 gold all the way up to 40,000. Then on top of that, I sell the Knight's Crest I had to put me at 45,000 gold total. I buy about 5 silver swords for if Roy ever needed to fight, and unfortunately there was no shop for me to buy tomes, which I am currently running low on. In the arena, Roy only had to back out of 1 fight, which was against the wyvern that Roy could have taken if only he had dodged more. Otherwise, Roy faced a lot of axe users and soldiers, and even shamans and mages. I usually always go for wagers less than 800 gold. Also, this could have been a way to grind staff rank on Lilina, but even after all of those fights in the arena, she still couldn't get to D rank. Roy just dodged a lot. After all of that, I seize. Chapter 18 was probably the toughest chapter since like chapter 8. First I go to the shop with Lilina and stock up on thunder tomes, sell some things I don't need, and then I will have Roy and Lilina camp out in the forest at the bottom of the starting area right above the river. That looks like it would be a nice place to camp and Roy and Lilina can spend some time together until it is interrupted by all of the nomads. Most of the enemies will want to go after Roy, but I can still try and manipulate them into suiciding into Lilina. That goes on for a while, but the RNG is in my favor. They have really low hit rates against Lilina, and Roy can take a lot of hits before I need to heal him up. The only problem would be if I get really unlucky and Lilina gets hit too much, as her only healing is 7 vulnerary uses and the shop doesn't sell any. This goes on until all of the normal reinforcements are over with. Then I go around and clean up the remaining enemies that didn't move in the beginning. I also do some more shopping. I get a restore staff for if Lilina ever gets to C rank in staves, and I get a few killing edges for Roy. Then comes the first major problem of this map, which is the trap, I guess it's called, where if you end your turn with a unit inside the circle of houses around the boss, a random amount of either nomads, nomad troopers, or both appear as reinforcements. There can be 4 at most, and this will continue for up to 20 turns or so. I cannot one round the boss without getting a lucky crit, so my only option is to wait out these random reinforcements. So they prefer to go after Roy, and I can use that to my advantage and try to pull them back to the forest so I can take them out safely, and I can heal Roy when he gets low. Then at one point they stopped coming, so I thought the coast was clear, but after a couple turns of not appearing, they suddenly started appearing again and caught me off guard. Luckily, I wasn't trying to fight the boss yet, so I was able to save myself and wait them out again. After that, I just spam end turn until I am sure that they are done and they don't trick me again. Now this is the toughest boss so far in the game. He has a brave bow and a brave sword and has the chance to one round Lilina. He only has roughly a 40% chance to hit her, but it's far too risky. So I let him attack Roy at one range, thinking that Roy will definitely survive. Well, to my surprise, Roy gets quadrupled. I should have double checked that, but it worked out because Roy dodged one attack and crit him in return. I brought 4 Blaze along and noticed that Lilina could get the kill with 4 Blaze. However, I also noticed that since he has his sword now equipped, I can safely try to pick him off with a Thunder Tome instead. I can do this by attacking with Lilina, then rescuing her with Roy, then dropping her, then attack, and repeat. Eventually it would work, even though the boss has an elixir and prolong it. Lilina does just get a crit to end it anyway. Chapter 19 was even more difficult than the last one. On this map, there are only 2 sets of forests that are sitting adjacent to each other. They are both near the left edge and about midway up the map. At first I thought it would be impossible to reach them before I get surrounded by enemies, and so on my first couple attempts, I just try to stay in the forest close to the starting point. The problem is that none of them are adjacent to each other, which makes healing Roy difficult, so I tried to see if I could reach the forest way up the left side, and I was able to make it up there just before the reinforcements start to come. I needed Roy to use his full movement every turn. I could keep Lilina around to heal him. Once I get set up in the forest, then it's just a matter of waiting out all of the reinforcements like always. There is a very annoying sage with a silent staff that will harass Lilina. From where he uses it, he probably has like a hit rate of 30, and I got very unlucky in most of my attempts. Otherwise though, most enemies aren't much trouble. Except for when the Myrmidons start coming in and they have hit rates in the 20s and 30s against Lilina and could kill her in 2 hits. Also, enemies like to go after Roy if they can. Unless Lilina has basically anything less than full HP, then they like to suicide into her. After a while they will all die, and then the only enemies left are inside of those walls. The sage with the sleep staff will be the first one I pull out. He is annoying but still easy enough to take out. Then I guess it depends on how close I am to the door for which enemies will start to move. So I do that and slowly pull them out, trying to only pull 1 or 2 at a time, and then retreat to the forest or whatever safe place I can find that I can kill them from. until we get to the Sword Master on the right, who has a killing edge and Lilina does not double him, meaning that I'm gonna almost have to risk getting crit on. In one attempt I tried to distract him with Roy, which didn't work out well because Roy can take one crit but not two, which is what happened. I tried running around in circles hoping for a way to attack him without risking a counterattack from him on enemy phase, but I had to settle on letting him attack Lilina and hoping she doesn't get crit, and it worked out. After that, the rest are easy enough. I give a goddess icon to Lilina because it is 2 extra points of avoid, which isn't much but it could be useful, and I use an energy ring on Roy. I then do some shopping and the boss is much easier than the last one, as this guy has a light brand which gives him a weapon triangle disadvantage against Lilina. She crits him to make it easy, but she would have still been fine otherwise. Chapter 20 is a pretty simple chapter. Nime and Dayan join in this chapter. It doesn't matter what happens to Nime, I just toss her weapons and she will get berserked on the first turn. I do keep her staves as I would like to have them in the case that she ends up surviving the chapter. Dayan appears as a green unit on turn 2 and will move and attack enemies, which is annoying. So Lilina can take care of all of the warriors and fighters at the start. Then there are 2 bolting sages that could be trouble, but luckily Roy dodges most of their attacks. Then they try to go after Nime a few times and Lilina can make them waste the last of their uses. The first Sword Master also causes some trouble. There is a sage nearby with a physics staff that likes to heal the Sword Master up to make it difficult to kill him. I can usually have Lilina weaken the guy, then have Roy come in for the kill. I also recruit Dayan and keep him close to me so he doesn't die. He is required for 20x and it is also required to beat this map in 25 turns or less for 20x. I also brought the torch staff so I can see what's coming. I can work my way up the left side, and the Myrmidon and Swordmaster are scary, but I get lucky and can take them out. Then Kath and a thief come in and open doors and take the treasure. I do end up getting the dragon shield from the last remaining chest and give it to Roy as I feel like he would make the better use of it. I couldn't foresee a situation where it could save Lilina from getting 1 shot or 2 shot as she relies on dodging to stay alive. It's pretty easy to take out the enemies in the throne room and some others that came from the chest room and below, except for that one Sword Master. Luckily Lilina dodged the attack. The boss is also very easy. Lilina can kill him like all of the others. 20x is another map with a gimmick, which is that there are 6 seize points and only one of them is the real one that will end the map when you seize it. The only reinforcements are the ones that will come out and ambush you if you seize one of the fake ones. So apparently the real seize point isn't random every time you restart the chapter. It is only random per save file, I guess, meaning that you can't just look up a guide. Anyway, the start of the chapter is a bit rough as there is only 1 forest tile and it is in range of one of the bosses who has a berserk staff. So for the first 3 turns I just try and make the guy waste his berserk uses. Sometimes Lilina gets hit and in that case I have to reset because she will just like to kill Roy, which actually causes a pretty funny scenario to happen. Basically, as long as Lilina doesn't get berserk, I can have her take out all of the enemies that come rushing at me. After that I can go around and take out some other enemies that haven't moved yet. I also make another boss that has a sleep staff waste all of his uses. Then I get to the first boss. I use the same strategy as I did on the chapter 18 boss. Once he is defeated, I have a gate to heal Lilina with instead of using vulneraries. Then instead of trying out this seize point, I noticed that during enemy phase, the camera pans over to the upper rightmost boss. I thought that maybe that meant that was the real seize point. I figure it's worth a try, so I go over and defeat him in the same way as the last. I seize and it turned out to be a fake, so then I realized that I'll probably have to try them all one by one until I find the real one, as there are probably no hints. So I go to the one right below, and this boss is easy to take out. I seize and it turned out to be the real one, and I beat the chapter. Now if I were to go through like 2 or more fake ones before finding the real one, I was prepared to reset the entire chapter with the new knowledge of where the real one was, so that I don't waste more tome uses than necessary. But since I got it on the second try, I just moved on. Chapter 21 is, in my opinion, very epic, both thematically and how this chapter actually went in this run. We get Yoder in this chapter, and he comes with a legendary weapon, either Maltet or Murgleis, depending on the route you went. In my case, I went Sakai route, so Yoder has Maltet. I trade over the Maltet to Roy, and then I send Yoder to sell his things in the armory, and he will soon die with the Saint Staff still on him, as it is not going to be useful for me. I have Roy holding on to some extra tomes for Lilina because she is going to need them, and Lilina herself has 4 tomes and a heal staff. There are a lot of enemies in this map, and I burned through a lot of tomes. Anyways, Roy and Lilina are going to stay beside each other most of the time as they work down towards the 2 adjacent forest tiles on the left edge of the midpoint of the map. This is going to trigger a reinforcement zone. There are mainly 2 paths for me to take in this chapter, and in both of them I will be forced to trigger at least 2 of the zones. In both paths, I will have to trigger the zone that covers all of the shrine area and more in the bottom right corner of the map. The other path that I did not take would force me to trigger the zone that covers much of the upper right corner. Ultimately, the path that takes me down, then right, then down again, is the one that gave me the most success. So Lilina faces very low hit rates against the wyverns, and they have close to 0% hit rates against her in a forest. Also, what happens is that if Lilina takes some damage, almost all of the enemies will attack her instead of Roy, which leaves them dead. So that is really good for me. The bishops are the only ones that you can't one round without a crit. There is also one dragon that I had to take out with 4 blaze later, but I can sit in those trees and wait out all of the enemies. Then I can start moving towards the boss, and I also have time to get the Knight's Crest from the village. After taking out the dragon, I can skip over the zone that triggers Gaul and only enter the last zone, which triggers 2 separate groups of wyverns for 3 turns. I would have liked to wait these guys out in a forest or mountain tile, but I was running low on time, as to get 21x I need to beat this map in 30 turns or less, and also Zeiss and Melody need to be recruited and alive, but that is already done. So I just try to rush to the boss. The Sage with a bolting is annoying, as I need to use Lilina's turn to constantly heal Roy. Eventually though, I get up to Murdoch. I really don't want to use 4 blades, so I just use a Thunder Tome and hope for a crit. Lilina also is fighting off bloodthirsty wyverns at the same time and trying to protect Roy, but she puts her chin up and crits Murdoch and survives the onslaught of wyverns and tells Roy to do something useful and seize. This was probably the most thrilling map for me so far. Chapter 21X is not really that difficult. It is Fog of War, but that isn't so bad. The gimmick of this map is that there are traps on certain tiles, and if you step on one, it will always trigger, and I think they always deal 10 damage. I looked up where they are to make things easier for me. Like always, there are going to be aggressive enemies that want to charge at me. Unfortunately, there are no defensive tiles here. Lilina still has great avoid though, and she will dodge most attacks. I can also use Roy as a human shield, and then Lilina can pick off the enemies one by one. I just hang around the starting area and wait out all of the enemies, and also wait till a druid uses up his silent staff. Then I go up the right side because that is where the least threatening enemies are, although the other side isn't all that bad. It's easy to take out the enemies then one by one. Then when I start approaching the boss and get close to the druids, they kind of give me a hard time, as I didn't realize I would need like an L-Fire to one round one of them. I leave him at like 1 HP and then he just gets healed by another druid with a physic. Looking back though, I could have just left him alone until I defeated the other druids, because I don't think that one that was giving me trouble moved. Lilina crit and killed him anyway though. The boss is kind of scary with his Nosferatu tome, because if Lilina gets hit, she doesn't have enough firepower to make up for his healing. I try to use a Thunder tome hoping for a crit, but then I switch over to the more accurate Fire tome, and that was enough to finish him, and I probably should have just used the Fire tome from the start. After this map, Roy finally promotes, and we get the Binding Blade and the Apocalypse tome. Chapter 22 might have been even more thrilling than Chapter 21. The first thing about this map is that there are no defensive terrains besides Zephiel's throne. That does not bode well for Lilina, but since Roy is now promoted, I will be doing most of the combat with him and giving him as many kills and experience as I can. It worked out pretty well and he reaches level 15 by the end. This map could have been very troublesome, but it actually turned out to be relatively simple up until I opened the throne room. But at the beginning of this map, there are a couple of exploits that I can take advantage of. The first is that I can have Roy hold on to Lilina's tomes, and Lilina can hold on to Roy's swords. So basically the inventories that each are supposed to have are swapped. There is a druid with a berserk staff and a bishop with a silent staff, and neither of them care that Roy and Lilina both have inventories that they can't do anything with. So they will try to berserk and silence Lilina until both staves have been used up. So that is one problem out of the way. It is also very nice that while this is going on, no enemies move or will charge straight at me. I think this is the first time this has ever happened. That brings me to the next exploit, which is the reinforcements for this map. Basically, the only reinforcements that spawn based on turns will be the one bishop in that blocked off stairway in the upper left. I believe this is because that one guy makes the map hit the enemy cap of 50, meaning that no more enemies could spawn in regardless. So I just wait out until turn 50 or so, and then I know that the only reinforcements left will be the ones that are triggered when opening the door to the throne room, and they all spawn in the bottom corners where the starting points are. Those guys aren't tied to a turn, which is why they still appear. There are also reinforcements that spawn from the 4 stairs inside the throne room after it is unlocked. However, they are still tied to turns and will not spawn if it is after turn 45 or so. My turn count on this map was massive, so I didn't have to worry about them. Kath and another thief are also reinforcements in this map, but they also will not appear if there is no room for them on the turn that they should appear. This means that I have access to any of the treasures that I want. There are 6 in total, but I only grabbed 4 of them, as I could only bring 1 chest key with me that had 4 uses left. The most useful is the Worm Slayer. There is also a dragon shield that I gave to Lilina, more on why I did that later, a white gem, and a sleep staff. So I will basically work through the map, giving Roy most of the kills, and I also want to try to prevent Lilina from taking any damage, as her only healing in this map is a 3-use vulnerary. I also hit the switches on my way. Roy ended up getting amazing level ups, which I am really thankful for, as he is going to need to start pulling his own weight from now on. So it is really easy to take my time with this and pull enemies 1 or 2 at a time. Eventually, before I open the throne room, the only enemy left will be the druid enclosed in that one room. I cannot get to him, and he has a physics staff that will be annoying later, but not as bad as I thought it would be. Then once I am prepared, I open the throne room. The turn after I do this, 2 heroes will attack Roy, and he won't kill them without a crit. Luckily, he did crit one of them. Lilina could have killed them, but she faced too much danger with their high hit rates. Then the dragons and druids reach me. I can set up so that Lilina can counter and kill the druids on enemy phase. Well, she could have if I equipped the Excalibur tome instead of the fire, but she crit one of them, so it was okay. Roy can one round one of the dragons and leave the other at 1 HP. Roy then needs to survive all of the attacks he will take. He needed to dodge at least one of them. Lilina finishes off the dragon and Roy kills the sniper and the bishop. Then I considered rushing at Zephiel before the reinforcements can catch up to me. I didn't know how the fight with Zephiel would go, so I decided I need to deal with the reinforcements first. The ones coming from the top, I can have Lilina kill the sniper and the druid on enemy phase, but she needs to heal, and I hope that she dodges their attacks. It works out, and I can have Roy face the heroes, and I also see the opportunity to draw another sniper from the other group and kill him with Lilina on enemy phase. Roy does a good job fighting the heroes and dodging attacks. Eventually, I can take them all out with Lilina facing the least amount of risk. Zephiel could have been trouble, but thanks to Roy leveling up strength, he is not so bad. So I gave the dragon shield to Lilina because with it she could take one hit from Zephiel if she is at full health. However, she ended up getting hit too much and ran out of healing and now could not take a hit. But Roy says, "Don't worry, I got you," and as a way of saying thanks for carrying most of the run, he crits Zephiel, saving Lilina any trouble of having to fight him. I was also worried that the druid would want to heal Zephiel with his physic, but he must have had a grudge against him and would rather watch his king die. Either that or Zephiel just wasn't low enough on HP or something for the heal AI to trigger. Chapter 23 is a pretty easy chapter. I will be continuing to give most of the kills to Roy, and by the end of this chapter he will get just enough experience to hit level 20. I bring some things to sell and then buy some swords for Roy. I also buy a few elixirs, a couple Excalibur tomes, and a mend staff and a recover staff. I don't know if I'll need all of it, but it is good to be prepared. On turn 2 or 3, Lilina is going to get attacked a lot of times while she is in a plains tile. She does have a slight chance to die here, but if she survives, I can get her into a forest tile with Roy, and then I can slowly use Roy to kill all the aggressive enemies. Then once that is done, I can use Roy to make all of the ballistas use up all of their shots so that I don't have to worry about them anymore. Sometimes I pull more wyverns as I work up the map, and then I'll just retreat to kill them. Eventually I'll get to the point where I have to wait for 2 druids to use up their sleep staves. Then a little further I have to wait for a druid to use up a berserk staff. I accidentally put Roy in range of the berserk staff and didn't trade his weapons away, so there were a couple of turns where Roy went around chasing Lilina trying to kill her. Thankfully he didn't one-shot her and she had just enough elixirs to survive, and she then forgave Roy for attacking her. Lilina then says let me do it, and she is able to make the druid waste the rest of his berserk staff. I can then make Brunia waste her bolting tome and then pull and kill the dragon. Then the enemies around Brunia act a little strange, but I just stay in the forest and mountains and can take them out no problem. I go and kill the last remaining dragon, and Roy wants to kill Brunia for the experience. Roy hits level 20 and caps 5 of his stats, including HP. On average, Roy should only cap his skill, so I have a very blessed Roy, and he didn't really have all that many stat boosters either. In this chapter and the last, I would chant Roy's our boy every time he leveled up, so I think that might have helped. I'm now regretting giving that dragon shield to Lilina right away and should have waited on it until I knew for sure whether I would have needed it against Zephiel, but oh well. Chapter 24 was the scariest chapter that was going through my mind as I was doing this run. I was always thinking about this chapter and worried about whether or not I would be able to beat it or if the run would end in this chapter. But once I finally got here, I quickly realized that it won't be so bad, and it was much easier than many of the most recent maps. This is the chapter that I was saving the legendary weapons for. I have 4 blades on Lilina with 19 uses, and I have both Durandal and the Binding Blade on Roy with 20 uses each. Roy also has 2 of the 3 Worm Slayers that I was also trying to save as much as possible for this chapter. Thanks to Roy capping strength and the support with Lilina, Roy can one-round all of these dragons with the Worm Slayer except for the ones on the thrones, or if any were to have more than 70 HP, which I don't think any of them did. The challenge of this chapter is that you are kinda on a timer, as there are tons of reinforcements that spawn closer and closer to you as you seize the thrones, and you have to seize them one by one to get the next area to be unlocked, and you can progress. There are many of these rooms that all lead to the final room where Idunn is waiting. The rooms themselves aren't so bad, as I can have Roy kill the dragons that move, and then Lilina can swoop in and kill the boss, and then Roy can seize. The only problem is how many turns that takes, and Roy and Lilina only have 6 move, so eventually the reinforcements catch up to me. That happens about halfway through the map, but I am able to stop and thin out some of their numbers, giving myself more room to work with. They only really catch up to me at that one time. After that, if I see 1 or 2 on my tail, I can usually set myself up so that Roy kills them on enemy phase, and I'm still making some progress towards the final room. Then once I am in the final room, Idunn, true to his name he is not that terrifying as a boss. I chip at him with Lilina, and Roy could have just one-rounded him anyway. Also, Faye was force deployed, so I put her Divine Stone in storage and let her get killed by the first reinforcement. That locks me out of getting the special scene after the credits, but she only has 5 move and I didn't feel like trying to save her. For the final chapter, Roy can solo it all by himself. He can take out the 2 dragons at the start, and then I heal him with Lilina, but he didn't really need it anyway. He can reach Idunn on turn 2, and she only has 1 range, so I can one-round her with the Binding Blade and beat the game. So this was probably the most fun I ever had playing the Binding Blade, and I'm really happy with how this run turned out. I don't know how accurate these stats are at the end here, that Roy had 2,317 battles, 483 wins, and 44 losses. I did have to reset a lot, but it is cool to see nonetheless. Lilina had 1,072 battles, 801 wins, and 41 losses. Also had to reset a lot because of Lilina dying. So Lilina had a much better win to battle ratio, but to be fair, Roy didn't even have a weapon most of the time. Roy did make up for it in the end though, when he promoted and told Lilina that she can now have a break, and he went on to to kill the majority of enemies in the last 4 maps. After the war, Roy and Lilina eventually got married, and often they would reminisce on their days in the war, fighting side by side, although most of the time Lilina would be doing all of the fighting, and Roy just watched as he had his hands full carrying Lilina's extra tomes. So with all that said, this is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, like, comment, subscribe, and have a great rest of your day.